Captain America: Brave New World was not well received upon release, and that's to put it mildly, or what we white people consider to be spicy. In fact, the recent Marvel movie was lambasted by many critics and other audience members who symbolically pushed it to the ground, circled it, and then kicked the absolute shit out of it while it was down. Because in terms of critical consensus, Captain America: Brave New World received an epic beatdown, the type that is usually reserved for snitches. If anything, upon release, it was more or less loathed. No relation. It was cinema non grata. Yet, I am not one of the people that disliked it. In fact, in my previous video on the subject, I detailed why I enjoyed Captain America: Brave New World. If anything, I believe the movie is fun, has a good lead that showcases why Anthony Mackie's Sam Wilson is perfect when it comes to taking up the mantle of Captain America. There's an interesting angle with Mackie's version of Cap where he has some regret over neglecting to inject himself with the super soldier serum back in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. There was some cool espionage shit, and the movie featured villains that were sympathetic, but not in ways causing them to be more sympathetic than our heroes, which is honestly something that past Marvel Studios films and TV shows with sympathetic worthy villains really kind of struggled with. And for those reasons, I clicked with Captain America: Brave New World. And if you haven't, definitely check out my earlier mentioned previous video on the subject to learn why my take differs from the opinion of many others in more detail, and why my opinion is ultimately the only one that matters, just like always, because I enjoyed the new Captain America. You. But regardless, in that prior episode, I concluded by noting how Captain America: Brave New World had many faults despite my praise, some that had to do with the script and editing, and others more due to events out of the filmmaker's control that aren't necessarily a problem with the movie per se, but are more an issue with Marvel Studios' overall strategy and the world environments that we currently dwell in, which some would call America in 2025, but what I actually refer to as a living hell, because if the rapture happened, we all failed the test. But regardless, I'm going to be discussing Captain America: Brave New World in quite a bit of detail, some of which could be considered spoilers, but if you have watched the trailers and followed both the marketing and the news of how troubled the production of this movie was, then you probably already know some or basically all of what I'm about to discuss. But still, if you are still in the dark on Captain America: Brave New World and are avoiding any sort of spoiler, then you should probably tap out of this video now and save it for later. Otherwise, keep watching and all that shit, especially if you believe my opinions are trash for whatever reason. Hey, I don't judge. Hate clicks make money too. Please like and subscribe so you can follow all of my opinions that you believe are just the worst. Captain America: Brave New World has a fair few problems within the film itself, and that's as good of a place to start discussing the movie's issues as any, with one of the most obvious examples being the unnatural and forced nature of the expository dialogue. See, given that a lot of Captain America: Brave New World references aspects and franchises of the MCU that were either on Disney+, films that were less popular, and even movies that go back to the damn near beginning of the Marvel Cinematic Universe itself, there are admittedly reasons why exposition is important and necessary. It's just unfortunate that a lot of the exposition is told in the most unrealistic, stilted, and overbearing way possible. For a few examples, TV news reporters and anchors prattling on and on about details that people in the universe already obviously know. Even more so than real life, because yes, I know that real life news reporters and news anchors will expand on some details that might be common knowledge, but they generally only do that to an extent, mostly because they understand that we, the people, have a basis in f***ing reality. They expect we, the audience, to at least have some awareness of real life events around us. On any given topic, news anchors and reporters don't have time to go over all that shit. There are commercials to get to, and then there are characters recapping previous encounters with other characters from past shows or movies with characters who were also present at those moments in those same past movies and shows. It's just a lot and feels really awkwardly placed. And look, exposition isn't inherently bad. If anything, it's actually good to inform viewers of what's going on in a continuity as expansive as the MCU. But still, even with that said, there are better ways to accomplish that objective. The most notable way would be utilizing characters unfamiliar with these past events and have those characters pose questions meant for world building, which is something that feels natural because once again, these characters are inquiring about information that they don't currently have, and thus allowing the exposition to essentially be a nice and comfortable conversation rather than be the storytelling equivalent of prepping for your final exam. Because hey, the Eternals' late term aborting a celestial fetus is on the test, motherfucker. Also, on a slightly related note, an over-elaborate PowerPoint presentation from the president informing foreign dignitaries to a treaty that they are more than aware of probably isn't the best and most narratively fluid way to present this information. Sure, I understand it makes for a more visually interesting piece of exposition, but it's so heavy-handed and clunky in terms of delivery that I kind of had to scoff at it. And on a further unrelated note, who in the White House had the time to painstakingly animate this one-time use 3D PowerPoint presentation? Our tax dollars at work, people. Additionally, Captain America Brave New World has tonal issues as well. Nothing that's necessarily narratively and thematically contradictory, but rather more because it sticks too close to the MCU tonal format every now and then, which is to say quippy dialogue in the face of dangerous enemies, adversaries on par with Thanos and the writers behind Secret Invasion. And this is a problem especially when it comes to the comedic banter from student Falcon Flyer Joaquin Torres, whose jokes and dialogue don't land as much as everyone else's, and even comes across as annoying at times. Which, to be clear, I blame the script and execution more so than actor Danny Ramirez, but still, it's worth noting that his jokes don't always work as intended by the filmmakers and scriptwriters, which is unfortunate. Another problem is the rough editing, especially within the first third of the movie. In fact, Captain America Brave New World often cuts to very disparate and seemingly separate plots and subplots that appear to have little to nothing to do with each other, and as a result, during that front third of the film, there is definitely a lot of jumping around in the narrative, flopping around like my breasts on a trampoline. It just goes from Sam and Joaquin to President Ross to Isaiah and to Conceal Carry, Inspector Gadget, all to the point that this section of Captain America Brave New World felt very disjointed. And admittedly, the editing makes logical sense retroactively, because every plot thread is indeed very relevant and ties into one another, but it doesn't change the fact that there is a lot of moving parts in the first third of the movie that feel separate and incohesive in live time. Now, let's move on to production problems, though this will be more of an overview rather than an extensive deep dive. See, there were controversies involving anti-Semitism and anti-Palestinian concerns, and numerous reshoots. Starting with the anti-Semitism, the movie was originally called Captain America New World Order, which was problematic considering the phrase New World Order is often associated with conspiracy theories of anti-Semitic bent, because, you know, a secret totalitarian shadow government of people pulling the strings in the background can, for many people who have the tendency to become dumbass Nostradamuses, easily veer into the bigoted notion that those authoritarians secretly controlling all aspects of life itself are of Jewish heritage, hence why the title was eventually changed to Captain America Brave New World, which was more acceptable. Furthermore, Captain America Brave New World was in hot water regarding the character of Ruth Batsura. See, this character is played by Israeli actress Shira Haas, and was originally named Sabra, who in the comics was a member of Mossad, an Israeli spy agency that also exists in real life, and the inclusion of Sabra was fairly controversial among Palestinian rights groups given her association with Mossad, and how the comics allegedly featured Arab characters that were culturally insensitive. Thus, Marvel changed the character's core name and abandoned her association with Mossad, and thus being an agent of Israel, which then led to criticisms from Jewish and Israeli organizations that her Israeli identity was being erased. So to be clear, there was some definite anger from both sides of the spectrum there. And that's even before mentioning the catastrophic devastation happening in that region of the world right now. And I think Marvel Studios did the best they could given the circumstances by changing Sabra's name to Ruth Batsura for the movie and altered her character so that she worked for President Ross rather than Mossad, all while still maintaining her Israeli identity and actress, which was a solid compromise in my honest opinion. Furthermore, Captain America Brave New World experienced extensive reshoots, even more than what a typical big-budget blockbuster generally receives, at least 22 days worth to be exact, which incidentally caused the movie's most likely very underreported budget to balloon out of control like Violet Beauregard. And alongside the fact that the film had 5 writers, there have been criticisms that Captain America Brave New World exchanged creative hands and had numerous conflicting influences at times, all to the point of undermining a cohesive story and message, because there were too many cooks. However, Captain America Brave New World has another major problem, though it is also not entirely the film's fault, rather than the decisions made by Marvel Studios and Disney higher-ups. See, Captain America Brave New World is sort of a sequel to 2008's The Incredible Hulk, the movie that released a couple of months after 2008's Iron Man launched the Marvel Cinematic Universe itself. In fact, the Hulk's 2 primary villains in Harrison Ford's President Ross and Tim Blake Nelson's The Leader, who is generally considered to be the Hulk's arch-nemesis, were present in The Incredible Hulk, albeit General Ross was played by the late William Hurt back in the day, and are thus now being used as major adversaries for the new Captain America. And on the one hand, this is really cool. After all, we don't see all that much Hulk stuff in the MCU, which is generally a shame, shame because I'm really into Hulk stuff. It's my kink. But on the other hand, it's pretty frustrating. Firstly, because the Hulk himself isn't present in this film about Hulk stuff. I mean, how can you have a Hulk film without the Hulk? The only Hulk that should be absent from a movie about the Hulk is Hulk Hogan. And secondly, it highlights how Marvel Studios is reluctant to do any movies involving the Hulk, even though he's played by Mark Ruffalo, which is silly because people love Mark Ruffalo. Disney, you're doing business wrong. Give us more Mark Ruffalo. While sure, I am well aware The Incredible Hulk as a movie didn't reach the heights of Iron Man's great critical reception or box office performance. I guess it forgot to take its financial Viagra. But so even with that said, that movie was released all the way back in 2008, which, I don't know if you knew this, was a long fucking time ago. To highlight how long ago that was, I was still in high school. The Great Recession happened. President Bush was in the White House. We realized President Bush fucked us, and I lived in Iowa and thus hated my life. In other words, a lot in the world has changed since then. I have tits now, meaning that since time has marched on for all of us, maybe the Incredible Hulk IP is due for another try, because one middling movie released a long time ago shouldn't dictate how you handle a property now in modernity. And before anyone says anything, I do not buy the Hulk only works when he's around other characters argument that was very popular for a long ass time. That's bullshit. Any character or story can be good when approached from the right angle and handled with high quality execution, because writers, they use their fingers to make the magic happen. Phrasing. So yeah, it would have been cool if Captain America Brave New World featured the Hulk in some form, or if a Hulk movie featured this similar plot. It's honestly kind of a problem. Additionally, I was immensely irritated when Captain America Brave New World's trailer spoiled Red Hulk. In the promotional material leading up to the film's release, we see Harrison Ford turning red. Literally, he transforms into Red Hulk. And while I understand that him turning into Call of Duty Big Red 1 is a major selling point for this movie, because it overall would be a convincing factor for movie theater wary audiences to park their asses into seats, his transformation doesn't happen until the end of the film, which is a problem seeing as Captain America Brave New World treats Ross's transformation as a big narrative reveal, meaning that's all the lead up to it throughout the movie, both from the start and to its climax, is already basically known by about everyone watching the movie, even before sitting down in a theater. It just James Blunts the surprise. Because it's one thing for comic book readers to guess what will occur in a movie, you know, because they have read the source material, but it's another thing entirely for the film to let everyone in on the secret to the point that it's not a secret anymore. Because Lil Debbie told us everything. She can't keep a secret to save her life. In other words, Red Hulk could have been a major reveal for audiences who didn't even know that there could be a Hulk in a red model. But instead, Captain America Brave New World's marketing chose to spoil this potentially cool plot thread instead, which is unfortunate. Furthermore, the leader had some imperfections as well. While yes, it was cool to see the Hulk's big bad in another movie, the leader's design leaves much to be desired. Abandoning his big head, big motherfucking brain look from the comics, and most likely switching up his appearance mid-production for whatever reason, the version of the leader we received is ugly. And yes, I know that makes sense for reasons of plot, but ugly can still contain stylistic creativity and design, goddammit, rather than looking like a nifty slick nutsack. Or in the leader's case, and as others on the internet have mentioned, like broccoli, which I'm internally making this an intentional callback to this background character from Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, whom I have named the Albert R. Broccoli. What I'm trying to say is that ugly can still have a unique design, all while also serving a narrative purpose like intimidation or various nuanced details that help it stand out, rather than just looking like overcooked vegetable. Jeez, put some fucking cheese whiz on that shit. There are children present. But anyway, the point. The leader's design is just fairly uninspired, and I would have preferred him to have a comic book accurate enlarged dome, but fuck me, what do I know? I'm just a dumbass on a website full of dumbasses. May the content live forever. Last but not least, Captain America Brave New World has one other problem. Though like some of the other issues with this film, this is not entirely the movie's fault. A problem of which we are talking about what's happening in real life. You know, the whole fascism thing. It's quite the trend and style in America right now. What a disaster. Because have you seen America right now? No, I'm not kidding. I'm asking. Please let me know if you have seen America right now. I don't know what the hell is going on anymore. And look, I know this might anger some of you watching, but I'm not gonna beat around the bush here. We are talking about Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and the rest of the complicit that are enabling this authoritarianism for dummies takeover. Because ever since Trump took office, every day has been a shit show regarding the violations of norms, laws, customs, morals, ethics, court orders, and honestly just plain old good taste. That's obviously gone too. There has just been no respite from this blitzkrieg of bullshit. There's kind of a catastrophe in Washington right now, and Captain America: Brave New World doesn't really entirely reflect that. Which, once again, not entirely the film's fault for reasons I'm about to explain. Because, you know, for a political thriller involving a problematic president and American imagery, could Captain America: Brave New World have predicted the horror show that we are facing? The answer to that is probably only to an extent, because it's not just that one of the two candidates on the ballot last November planned to install fascism in this country like a virus, or Doge poking around in your grandparents' social security, but rather it's due to how the Trump regime is essentially speedrunning fascism to the point that this country will break sooner rather than later. And in terms of Captain America: Brave New World, it did take me some time to kinda ignore the real-world optics of what's happening in the United States right now. Because early on in Captain America: Brave New World, when Joaquin Torres gets excited about being invited to the White House, the voice in the back of my mind was like, should he really be that excited? I mean, because these days, it's less of being invited to the White House and more of a being threatened to the White House. Like, man, you don't have to go. If the Philadelphia Eagles could just nope out of that shit, then you can too, Joaquin. I'm a doctor of emotions, and my advice is that you get the fuck out of there, because that's definitely what the Los Angeles Dodgers should have done. Hashtag Los Angeles Draft Dodgers. Additionally, there's the undeniable fact that Ross is a far more sympathetic and less chaotic president than the real-life president currently residing in the White House, mostly because in terms of sympathy, Ross might be flawed, but he actually has some good qualities worthy of some form of admiration, which I really can't say the same for his real-life counterpart. And in terms of chaos, Ross might transform into Red Hulk and destroy the White House, but that's honestly not as bad as what's happening in the White House and Washington, D.C. at the current moment. Because for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, this type of event isn't really all that out of the ordinary. This is just another day in America. But in real life, the defiance of court orders, not spending government money on programs and such that Congress had already allocated, the shuttering, censoring, and the mass firings at government agencies, denying human rights, deporting undocumented and even legal residents, some to a slave labor prison in El Salvador, RFK Jr. being RFK Jr., Elon Musk being a piece of shit, the unlikable J.D. Vance potentially torpedoing a strong economy for no good reason, and the simultaneous abject cruelty and utter incompetence frequently displayed by Trump and the rest of his regime is an all-out assault on the rule of law and personal morals. As I said, it's a shit show, all to the point that I'd honestly prefer to be living in the universe where a giant red rage monster obliterates the White House right now. Because while Red Hulk is destroying the White House, at least he isn't destroying America. So yeah, I kinda just couldn't help dwelling on this during the movie. It was a common intrusive thought. To conclude, Captain America: Brave New World contains many issues, some of which were outside of the filmmaker's control, but were nonetheless problems with the movie. Yet that doesn't change the fact that I really enjoyed Captain America: Brave New World. While yes, the production was undeniably far messier than it should have been, I still liked the movie for reasons explained in my previous video on the subject. If anything, the blemishes just don't alter the fact that the movie we received was ultimately pretty good, just like how I believe in one true God, our Lord and Savior Ned Schneebly. And for that, I still really dug Captain America: Brave New World in spite of its production woes. I thought it was a solidly fun Captain America venture, ultimately embodying a simple yet enjoyable cinematic dinner with a side of bad broccoli.